Good evening and welcome to the Gin and Tonic show for Friday, the 3rd of March, 2017. It's Rob, and I will just wait a few moments for some people to join, as well as my co-host. So just bear with us as we wait for some extra people to join our show tonight. Hey, good evening, Abu. How are you, sir? There we go. I think I can hear you now. Abu, are you there? I think I can hear you clicking away there. Okay, so I don't know if you can hear me, but Abu has joined us. Khalif, my co-host for the Gin and Tonic show. And today's show will be covering Islamic slavery in the fiqh, how do I pronounce it? Fiqh, I believe it is, and the sunnah. So we're going to have a look and see. I think Abu's got quite a bit of information that he's going to share with us. What does Islam actually say about slavery? And then what are our thoughts about that? I also have some information on it, both the sunnah and the fiqh, if I've pronounced that correctly. And then I'll also send you a link because the video is too long to watch, courtesy of one of our viewers here, who has split up a video where for over an hour, one of the Muslims at Speaker's Corner talks about slavery. Good evening, Abu. There you are.
Good evening.
Yeah, I heard you join the first time, and I could hear you clicking, but I don't think you could speak.
No, it was the sound. I couldn't hear you. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I prepared. I made one translation of a tape recording of Sheikh Albani, and one translation of a tape recording of from Tafsir Surat An-Nisa with Sheikh Al-Uthaymin, and then I made some hadith and some things, a few hadith with some sharh and a quote from Tafsir al-Tabari. So that's what I have to offer.
Okay, so before we get started, because you have mentioned that slavery has been spoken about before on the show, I'm not sure how long ago, but you specifically, wanted to talk about it in relation to fiqh, if I've pronounced that correctly, and the sunnah. So first, if you could share with everybody what the fiqh and the sunnah is, and then maybe I'll ask you some questions about that before you get started.
Fiqh means like jurisprudence. Sunnah just means the canon of hadith. That's pretty much what it means.
Okay. So the sunnah, remind me then of the biography of Muhammad. What is that
Sirah.
called? That's the Sirah. Yeah. Okay. So what we're looking at really is what does the jurisprudence say around slavery today or in the past?
I mean, we don't go too deep into, but just so you get a kind of overview. It's more correct to say that it's an overview. Some things from fiqh, some things from tafsir, and something directly from the sunnah, you can say. So you get an overview of like what real Islam says.
Okay, so this and this is based. Is this based on the Quran, or is this based on the Quran and the Hadith, or is there other sources? Where does this originally come from? What's its roots?
I mean, you can ask questions while I'm reading my presentation, but as I said, this is a tape recording. The first thing is from a tape recording of Sheikh Albani, and the other is a tafsir will Uthaymeen, and the rest is. But you will kind of get a sense of how they make so-called derive the evidence and so on.
Okay, cool. Go ahead.
Okay. Maybe I should show this picture of Sheikh Albani. I don't know why. The browser. Yeah, okay. Yeah, so this is from a recording of Sheikh Albani. Student asks, the student, reciting student asks, we have issues about the verdict of slavery in Islam, so we would love if you gave us the answers about the verdicts of slavery from which the ambiguities about it continues. Albani. Would that the verdict/rulings of the slavery comes back to the dwelling places of Islam. In that case, we would not find in them anything baffling. Many of the people today claims that there is no slavery in Islam, and this is from the aberration that has inflicted some Islamic authors. Slavery in Islam is not anathematized/abandoned, but it is not allowed to anathematize it because the infidel councils and those who are associated with them interrupts/disturbance happen, but after it is fixed, then something happens, so technical disturbance. The Sheikh continues, good. Slavery in Islam is something from the Sharia, and it has not been abrogated, and it will not become abrogated, and especially not if the abrogator have an infidel council, meaning especially not if he is part of an infidel council. The council that makes war against the Muslims in every Islamic country. This is the first. The secondly, the endorsement/stabilization, iqrar, of the wise Sharia for slavery is not on the affirmative/obligatory road, but truly it is on the road of allowed, meaning that it is mubah. You do not get any extra points in paradise if you have many slaves, but you do not get any minus points either. And you are not punished for not having any slaves, and you're not punished for having slaves. That is because the Muslim ruler, if he invades/conquers a tribe, group of people, nation, qawm in Arabic, among the infidels, so he saba, makes woman into female slave. From them, i.e. the infidels, women and men, male slaves. So then he has the choice to implement in these captured people the verdict from 4 verdicts. 2 of them are mentioned in the Qur'an, and his the mighty and glorious words, Surah Muhammad verse 4. So when those who disbelieved in battle, so when you meet those who disbelieve in battle, strike their necks until, when you have inflicted slaughter upon them, then secure their bonds and either confer favor afterward or ransom them until the war lay down its burdens. That is the command. And if Allah had willed, he could have taken vengeance upon them himself, but he ordered armed struggle to test some of you by means of others, and those who are killed in the cause of Allah, never will he waste their deeds. This ayah is clear. Al-man, to launch their ways. Al-man is from the Arabic text. Al-man means to launch their ways. This Muslim ruler, to launch their ways and either exchange something that is known today, the system of exchange of hostages. So these 2 verdicts are from the 4, and the 2 other verdicts are taken from the sunnah, the operation that the Messenger of Allah ﷺ was running, and the righteous Salaf. One of them, the killing slash execution, killing the captured, and the other one is their enslavement. And this was the Salaf running, and on this was the Salaf running, meaning this is what the Salaf and the Prophet did. Until a recent era, the days when the Islamic jihad was a standing reality between the Muslims and the infidels, until the end of the Uthmanic state. Then this slavery that was allowed by the Messenger ﷺ includes all people and tribes. It is not special for non-Arabs, as what is the madhab of some judicial fuqaha in all times and lately. Listen, O brother, focus, he says to someone in the audience. There is a saying from some of the fuqaha that slavery cannot be applied on Arabs, and this is not correct, because more than one Arab person was enslaved, and their names are all well known in the books of Hadith and Sunnah. So in the survival/maintenance of this verdict, there is advantage/benefits to the enslavers and the enslaved. One option. When it comes to the enslavers, so there is no doubt that those persons are like their capital that is allowed. So it is wealth to the Islamic nation. The capital/wealth, infidel capital that is taken from them with the power of the sword, as he ﷺ said in Sahih Hadith, I was sent between the hands of the hour. I was sent between the hands of the hour, meaning judgment day, until Allah is worshipped alone with no association, and my rizq, provisions, was made under the shadow of my spear, and the joke and subduction/humiliation was made over the one that disobeyed my commands, and that one that associates himself with a tribe/group, so he is from them. And my risk, provisions, was made under the shadow of my spear, i.e. this capital/wealth that they take as booty, the mujahideen, from the infidels, and this is booty with a system in Islam that is well known. This is material power for the Muslims. They strengthen themselves with it over every enemy of the religion. As well, the sabi, female slave, and enslavement of men and women from them, the small of them and the old of them. This is also power, a boon for the Muslims. So this is from their righteous good. I said, and it is also, or it is the enslavement, and it is good for the enslaved also, the infidels, and that is what the Messenger ﷺ pointed to in the Sahih Hadith. He said, truly, your Lord is baffled by tribes/groups of people that are dragged to the paradise in chains. And we repeat it. Truly, your Lord is baffled by tribes that are dragged to the paradise in chains. He points to, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, those captured people that are transferred despite their... He points to, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, to those captured people that are transferred despite their noses from the lands of the infidels and paganism, infidelity and paganism, shirk, and error, astrayness, to the lands of light and guidance, the lands of Islam. And they are captured and they are enchained by chains, despite their noses, so they live as slaves, enslaved under the Muslim lords. So they go against them, meaning the slave go against the masters. So they go against them and becomes familiar with their good manners, their truthfulness, and their good treatment until these captured people, until these captured people, and they are still in their infidelity and their error/misguidedness, and after a time they adopt the Muslim manners and adopt their religion, so their chains become something good for them in this life and the hereafter. And we therefore find in the history of Islam and in the heads/leaders of the tabi'in is the ones who follow the Sahaba and the generation after that and the generation after that. The old ones of those captured, they were either driven to the Islamic countries directly, the captured of their parents, so their seed came and their clans, their children to Islamic countries with Muslims. So the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam said the truth when he said, "Truly your Lord is baffled by tribes that are dragged to paradise in chains." Therefore, it is not allowed for the Muslim that knows about this truth in Sharia to agree with the infidels in their saying/opinion of the abandonment of slavery. And in reality, they did not abandon it. They abandoned enslavement of individuals, but truly they enslaved peoples and nations, and lastly their deeds against the people of Iraq, and the occupation of their country, and the enslavement of them, and the taking of their wealth, and so on, to the biggest proof of the lack of their honesty in the abandonment of slavery that they are so glad about. Okay, so that was what Sheikh Albani said about that.
You've been complimented on your impersonation there, so good job.
Okay, I don't know if I can impersonate. He doesn't really sound like this is a fun.
I know.
Okay, now you see it. Okay, so this is from Tafsir Surat An-Nisa. Very good lecture. As I said, I don't like his opinions, but his lectures are tremendously good. This Al-Uthaymeen. Anyway, so Al-Uthaymeen makes tafsir on verse 3 in Surah An-Nisa. And if you fear that you will not deal justly with the orphan girls, then marry those that please you of other women, those or 3 or 4, 2 or 3 or 4. But if you fear that you will not be just, then marry only one or those your right hand possesses. That is more suitable, that you may not incline to injustice. I can't. Okay. So, if you fear that you will not be just, khiftum, feared, i.e., if you believe not to be just, so on, i.e., so marry one, and do not increase over that, or those your right hand possesses. It does it mean marry what your right hand possesses? I ask. No, because what the right hand possesses cannot be married. The right hand possession is given by ownership and is not given by marriage. And it is therefore haram for a man to marry his female slave, amatahu in Arabic. True? Is it haram for a man to marry his female slave? Ah? Oh yes, it is haram for a man to marry his female slave, because she is halal for him on a bond that is stronger than marriage, and that is possession of the right hand, and the weaker cannot respond to the stronger. The weaker cannot respond to the stronger, indifferent to the opposite, because the stronger can respond to the weaker. If a man, this is maybe weird when you translate it to English, it's kind of fiqh, it's kind of jurisprudence language, hard to translate directly. If a man buys his wife, the marriage is cleaved, and she is halal for him as what his right hand possesses. Do you know? But if with him is a female slave, so it is not possible to marry her, because he, what? Because he owns her with a bond stronger than marriage. Truly the Lord owns his slave and utility in opposite to the husband, because he do not own anything but the utility. Therefore, it is not correct to say, truly his words, what your right hand possesses, is bent upon his words, so one, for wahidatan in Arabic, because the meaning differs. But the meaning is, so marry one, enjoy what your right hand possesses, or similar to it. The important that it is not bent upon what comes before. And then he goes deep into grammar, so I skip that. Okay, so that was some samples from fiqh and tafsir. Now let us look at something from the hadith, and this will probably go more into like female slaves. So in Sahih al-Bukhari, the book of manumission, bab, door in English, meaning section, whom among the Arabs that owned slaves, so he gave, traded, had sex with, ransomed, and bred offspring with female slaves. Kitab al-Itq. I wrote, narrated by Ibn Aun, I wrote a letter to Nafi', and Nafi' wrote in reply to my letter that the Prophet ﷺ had suddenly attacked, what is called, Bani Mustaliq, a Jewish tribe, without warning, while they were heedless and their cattle were being watered at the places of water. Their fighting men were killed, and their women and children were taken as captives. The Prophet ﷺ got what's called Juwayriya, meaning the Prophet took her as his sex slave on that day. Nafi' said that Ibn Umar had told him the above narration and that Ibn Umar was in that army. Okay, this is Sahih Bukhari, volume 3, book 46, hadith 717. So this is kind of just an example of evidence from the Sunnah that the Prophet took sex slaves. Yeah, maybe similar to like what we now associate with Ad-Dawlatul Islamiyya or ISIS. Narrated Abu Sa'id al-Khudri that during the battle with Bani Mustaliq, they, Muslims, captured some female, like sex slaves, sabi in Arabic, and intended to have sexual relation with them without impregnating them. So they asked the Prophet ﷺ about cautious interrupt, as in Arabic, al-azl. The Prophet, so they have a word for that in Arabic, like one word to describe that. Kind of interesting. Anyway, the Prophet ﷺ said, "It is better that you should not do it, for Allah has written whom He is going to create till the day of resurrection." An Qaza', like narrated by Qaza', said, I heard Abu Sa'id saying that the Prophet ﷺ said, "No soul is ordained to be created, but Allah will create it." So while they, after the battle, are raping the female captives, they should not worry about making them pregnant, meaning they should not worry to come inside them, because Allah has predetermined everything, including who will be created or not, until the day of judgment. In Sahih Muslim, and this hadith makes it many places, from the book of suckling, of all places, Abu Sa'id al-Khudri, Allah be pleased with him, reported that at the battle of Hunayn, Allah's Messenger ﷺ sent an army to Awtas and encountered the enemy and fought with them. Having overcome them and take them captives, the companions of Allah's Messenger ﷺ seemed to refrain from having intercourse with captive women because, and here they have completely translated it wrong, probably deliberately. In Arabic, I can read the whole thing. It's like وَأَصَابُ لَهُمْ سَبَايَا فكأن أناسا من أصحاب رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم تحرجوا من غشيانهن من أجل أزواجهن من المشركين. So the meaning is that they were embarrassed. تحرجوا, they were embarrassed because these women, they had among the pagans, they were already married to pagans, so the Sahaba felt kind of ashamed when they were about to have sex with them. So okay, so of their husbands being polytheists, it should be among the polytheists, min al-mushrikeen. Then Allah Most High sent down this ayah from the Quran. And woman already married except those whom your right hand possesses. And Tafsir al-Tabari says about this ayah from the Quran, narrated by Abi Qalaba about his words, and woman already married except those whom your right hand possesses, unquote. What you have taken as sabi, meaning female sex slaves, from the woman, if you have made a woman sabi, female slave, and she has a husband in her tribe, in her qawm, so there is nothing wrong to have intercourse with her, i.e. rape her, probably. Can anyone... Okay, yeah, so that's my presentation.
Cool. Very good. You've got a lot of sources there. One of our Muslim viewers is saying that there's no terminology as sex slave in Arabic. What would be your...
No. The word is always sabi.
And what is sebi?
I mean, sabi can there's no, they don't say it as, of course they're not going to say it as sex slaves. They use the word sabi.
What does that translate to?
Well, it's used for female slaves. Yeah, so the correct, they're not using the word sex slaves. This means sabi, which means...
Okay.
Which is so there are different words. Like one word for slave is abd, one word for slave is riq, and one is sabi. And usually they use the word riq for male slaves, and they usually use the word sabi for female slaves in Islam.
Okay, cool. Welcome, Raven. How are you, my good sir? Oh, maybe he's joined, but we can't.
I think I have to water my throat a little bit. I'll come back soon, okay?
Okay, yeah, no worries. No. Thanks for that. So, obviously, Abu shared some of, I believe it's the jurisprudence, so some of the rulings by some well-respected jurists, I guess one would call it in the Western world. So, Sharif, since you're in the comments there, you seem to be objecting to some words. I guess my question for you is whether the words directly translate, would you agree that slavery is condoned, and maybe even more than condoned, it is, what word would I use? It is said that it's entirely legal under certain parameters. Because one of the things that I seem to hear from, and I just use the word because that's the easiest word for me to understand them, is the Muslim apologists in Speaker's Corner. What I hear from them, and I will actually show you the video that you can go watch. It's a bit long, so I'm not going to play it. But basically what some Muslim apologists attempt to say is that yes, there was some kind of slavery. It was only when there was a battle under war conditions, and if the men were all killed, then essentially the woman either had the choice. So the question really gets posed back to us when asking the question. You know, it's a false dichotomy, but it's often posed in a way similar to this, which is, so what would you do once you'd slaughtered, or you defeated your enemy? Would you leave the women to fend for themselves, or would you take them essentially and look after them? And of course, that's a bit of a sanitization, I guess, of slavery, in the sense of like look after them. They become your property. And so I think that's the thing that anybody who's not involved in Islam or who no longer believes slavery is a good thing is really concerned with, the owning of another person as property. Because that for me is the seminal definition of slavery. If you own another person as property, then they're a slave. I'm going to give you this video here. So let me attempt to share the screen here, and I will, so that you can see that. So there we go. Hopefully that comes up. So there you go. If you, and I will pop the link into the chat. This actually comes from Lamb of God. So Lamb of God, I know you're watching. So here's part one of your video. It's broken into 4 parts, and they're about 15 minutes each. So you can go and watch that. The particular person, I don't know that you'll be able to hear it. No, you won't be able to hear it, unfortunately. But there's the video. So here's one of the videos that where you have. And now, Adnan, I don't choose the weakest people that I can find. And these are obviously people that I have interactions with, so I kind of know them a little bit. Adnan does talks. He does hour-long debates. You know, he's not just somebody that walks along there. So that's this gentleman over here with a beard, obviously. This is an atheist. There's another atheist, and there's another gentleman just behind him there who you'll hear as well, who's a non-believer at least. And so he's, you know, appears to be reasonably knowledgeable, puts himself across as reasonably knowledgeable. And in the video, you will see him attempt to explain slavery. And of course, what I noticed with a number of Muslim interlocutors, and when we have conversations, 2 things normally come up whenever you confront, you know, any Muslim about slavery. One is that they will ask, well, how can you say it's wrong? So they'll switch it back on you, typically, as I understand it, called the tu quid quo fallacy. So instead of fully answering the objection that's brought to them, they will say, well, I'm not going to answer it, or I'm going to half answer it, but how can you say it's wrong? So that's one of the things that comes up when slavery is brought up. And then the other one is, again, another sort of tu quid quo fallacy, which is, well, look at the West, look at America, look at this one, look at that one. And so, you know, let's not entirely answer the question. Or even if we do, even if we as a Muslim say that, you know, yes, we accept slavery, well, look at what you guys are doing, look at, you know, what's going on. So I encourage you to watch that video there, and then hopefully that'll give you some idea of, you know, what somebody in Speaker's Corner says that, you know, I think a few Muslims feel is reasonably knowledgeable. He's not a sheikh or an imam as far as I'm aware, but, you know, he does speak quite a lot, not only in Speaker's Corner, but in, you know, official settings, let's say. So, yeah, that would be the video I would suggest people have a look at. There's probably other ones. If you type into YouTube, you know, Islam slavery, then you'll probably pick that up. So I am interested in any Muslims who are watching. I guess the main question is, A, do you accept that there is slavery in Islam? I think you can't get away from saying that there is slavery in Islam, certainly in the past. Do you accept that Islam still condones slavery today? And if so, you know, to what degree do you consider it slavery? Because it seems like the jurisprudence that Abu particularly said or talked about seemed to make it very clear that slavery can't and wouldn't be abolished or condoned.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's mentioned, I don't know how many times in the Qur'an, and mentioned in the Hadith, I don't know how many times. So
I was doing a little bit of reading on it as well, and a lot of people point towards the American slave trade and the European slave trade, and having, you know, just looked into a little bit of the history. I'm by no means a historian or an expert, but the little bit I got is that slavery started around 1400, give or take, in Europe. Portugal, I believe, was the beginning part of it, and they went to Africa. But actually, when they got to Africa, there were already Muslim slave traders, so they actually bought the slaves from Muslims who were already in Africa. Is that your understanding, or what do you know about that side?
Sorry, can you repeat the last thing there?
Sorry,
I was looking at the chat. Yeah.
So what's your understanding of the history of slavery in the sense of when it started? Because, you know, whenever this topic is brought up, at some point, some Muslims will point towards, you know, the US and Europe to say, hey, you guys were involved in slavery as well, so no, don't point fingers at us.
You mean the first historical evidence of slavery? I don't know.
No, well, no, carry on.
I think it's very blurry. There might even have been slaves back in the hunter-gatherer era. But I think it's post-invention of agriculture, it became more and more profitable. Like when you have larger tribes, you control like an area of land, and you go to another tribe and you take them as slaves. I think it is at least as old as agriculture, I think.
Yes, yeah, I'm sure it is. And as I say, the bits that I was reading about was how the Europeans went to Africa and actually bought slaves rather than going to look for them in deepest, darkest Africa at that stage. They bought them from slave traders who were already there, who were Muslims. And the other part that was interesting that I noticed is that a majority of the slaves were actually female slaves that were taken on the East Coast. So there was obviously the Eastern slave trade and the Western slave trade. Clearly,
yeah, I think that's probably the main difference between like the slave trade when they shipped people from West Africa to the Americas. That was like very kind of heartless. For economical reasons, they wanted to exploit their labor, and that's it. While in Islam, it's more, I think they were more focused on the women.
Yes, that's my understanding as well, so that they could populate the harams and be traded in that sense. And the other thing that I read was that the black Africans, well, there were only black Africans, the African slaves were actually castrated. But I wasn't sure why that happened, and so that's an interesting thing as to why you would do that.
There was some guy in the chat. Fikras, can anyone comment on the state of slaves under Islam? Were they as bad as slaves under Europeans, or may be under pharaohs, if there were any? I think this is better that you take with someone that is an expert on, as an historian. It's too bad that Klingshore isn't here, because I can talk about like the fiqh and so things like that, but I'm not an historian in that way. But I mean, if I should say something in the favor of Islam, at least there is some encouragement to not treat your slaves too badly, and there is also encouragement to free them. And that is a good deed, considered to be a good deed. So,
because the other point that was raised in this video anyway was the question: well, can your slave attend Oxford University? Can your slave be made a king? This was actually Adnan saying that. Now, apparently, they did this, and the response, quite rightly, from his
Oxford University.
Yeah. And quite rightly, his respondents, or the people he was speaking to, said, yes, well, a slave can do anything that his master allows him to do. So he could essentially do anything, because he was going, oh, can the slave eat with you? Can they wear your clothes? And of course, the response correctly was, it doesn't matter what you're bringing. If he owns the person, he can then allow that person to do whatever he wants. It's not what he allows the person to do.
And it's the same thing like with the slave in Rome. Not all slaves in Rome were like this, like you see on the plantage. What do you call it?
Plantation.
Like on the plantations where they're like locked in chains and work themselves to death. I mean, the slaves of Rome some slaves were quite well treated, and they were you had some slaves that were specialized in, like, they were like that day's white collar workers, and so there is a huge difference being a slave and being a slave. Some slaves had it much better than other slaves. And in Greek history, there's also examples of people that began as slaves and then were freed and then become the richest person in the land and so on. So, yeah, so what counts as a slave and what's not counted as a slave, it's kind of blurry.
Yes. Well, Sharif, our Muslim commentator there, is basically saying that they did not castrate black slaves. That seems completely opposite of what I've read. So if you can present something that shows me that, Sharif, because I can go look as we talk here, and what I've read is that there were most of the male slaves that were taken towards the east were castrated, and up to 80% or more of them died en route. And the figures, again, historical figures, which we can question for sure, was that about 10 to 15% of slaves died that were moved from the west coast of Africa to the US. That journey. Obviously, that was overseas, but the journey from Africa to the east, the death rate on the actual march, shall we call it, the movement, was extremely high. So. I'm not saying everyone was. I'm saying that was the common practice. That's my reading of the historical slavery that happened when Africans were brought into slavery. I'm not saying every single black man, obviously, but that was common practice. That's my understanding of the reading here. So I'm happy to look at that.
I think there's a dude in the chat called Exkabar. Sex against the will of a woman, i.e. rape, is forbidden in Islam. End of.
Who's saying that?
Well, so do you think that all the women that were taken captured in the Ghazawat, when the Prophet and his Sahaba and the Tabi'in, do you think all of them wanted to have sex with their overlords? I doubt it.
So we do have a visitor in here.
Yeah, let him speak.
Hilarious?
Hilarious, Zulu. Hilarious.
Hilarious.
Yeah.
You've got feedback there. Whenever we speak, we can hear ourselves. Have you got headphones?
I've muted myself.
Well, obviously, I can hear you now. And I can hear myself.
Yeah, I'm talking now, yeah.
Cool. So you wanted to join. What is your thoughts?
Well, personally, I'm Christian, so my opinions on this is very subjective.
Yeah, but I mean, you would still have. We can hear ourselves. Have you got headphones you can put on?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I can do that.
Yeah, just pop some headphones on.
Yeah.
As I speak, I can hear myself coming back there.
Yeah.
Okay, he's muted himself for a moment there while he puts headphones on. Welcome to Christian. We haven't had a Christian in here for, I can't remember when, really. So again, to Sharif in the chat, I guess you would acknowledge that slavery is condoned by Islam. Are you contesting the fact that Islam not only condones it, but encourages it under certain circumstances? What is your opinion on that?
Me personally?
No, sorry, I was speaking to one of our Muslim viewers there. But yes, feel free to give me your thoughts. Obviously, all of our opinions are based on what we read, so that's fine. What's your thought? And
from the research I've been doing, in the Quran especially, there's a lot of instances when Muhammad would rape his not rape, but he would have sex with underage women, and he would encourage his men to sleep with concubines, and it's a lot of sexual things in the actual Quran, and it's kind of off-putting to see those kind of things. I mean, someone that's supposed to be a prophet and supposed to be holy and supposed to be a messenger of God doing these sexual acts like this, you wouldn't see these kind of things happening with prophets from the Bible. I mean, the only times you'd hear about concubines were when there was kings, but they weren't supposed to be direct messengers of God like the prophets. So to see them doing things like this, it's a bit bizarre. I don't think you can get away from it from a Christian point of view to say that slavery isn't condoned in the Bible. You may have an argument. I'm not an expert on Christianity, but you may have an argument. Oh, it's not condoned. It's not condoned in the Bible.
Oh no, it clearly is. Must I go
No,
get
no,
you?
no. It's the way it's the way you perceive it, because it does say treat your slaves. I think it says treat them kindly, only because of the historical context. Whenever you read the Bible, you have to look at the historical context. Just like how back then you'd have or armor bearer, or you'd have chariots. You have to look at the context. What were they doing in the era? What was the norm? Obviously, slavery was the norm. So to them, they were given that law to treat them nicely because that was the norm. You see, and the slavery that happened in Israel, the nation of Israel, is not the same as the slavery that happened in the Atlantic slave trade. Because back then, if you actually read the reason why people were slaves in that time were because they couldn't pay off their debt. So in order to pay off the debt, they would have to become to give service to the person they owe. So they might have to be a slave or work for them for a few years to pay off their debt.
Okay,
So the kind of slavery was more business or more political than simply whipping them and making them look like animals. So it's the historical context that you have to look at when you see those kind of things.
okay. So let me ask you a couple of questions then, because it sounds like obviously, and I don't want to put words in your mouth. So let me rather ask you a question. Do you condemn or condone slavery today?
I
And what?
condone all types of slavery.
Sorry, you mean you condemn it, as
I
in like
condemn.
it's bad?
Sorry.
Yeah,
I condemn. Yeah.
Okay, and my definition of slavery, and you can tell me yours. My definition of slavery is the owning of one human being by another. Would that be a fair definition for you?
Yes.
Is there anywhere in the Bible that specifically and clearly states that slavery is to be outlawed or abolished? I mean, I
Yes.
don't want
Well,
to put you on the
obviously,
spot and say you need to get it now. Can you produce that? Can you pop it into the chats or somewhere like that so that we can clearly see the Bible says at some point, no, slavery is wrong. It should be abolished forevermore, or words to that effect.
I mean, it's not going to
I
say
actually
entirely
can.
in those words, but you can kind of put two and two together in the New Testament when the New Covenant is made. Just like how back then they used to stone people, they used to do, basically the laws back then were very, very strict because God was trying to make a foundation of it. It was more gritty, the Old Testament. But obviously, when Jesus came now, he brought grace into it, and that's why you don't, make sacrifices anymore because he was the ultimate sacrifice. So a lot of things that were acceptable then will not be acceptable now as a modern day Christian or even as an early Christian because we don't follow that particular law because we're not Israelites and we don't follow the Mosaic law. So in using that kind of way of thinking, you could even then say that slavery, we don't really follow that either. And also, to even prove that slavery isn't really recommended anymore, the way that I was talking about, because if you look in the New Testament, whenever Jesus is saying, love thy neighbor as you love yourself, treat others as you want them to treat unto you, the basic verses like that. You say, treat a free man the way you want to be treated to every man. So it's just simple things like that. You just need to understand the historical context. When it says, for example, like I just said, now stoning, and say why does the Bible condone killing people if they're gay or whatever? But if you don't understand the historical context, it's hard for you to really, yeah. That's all I have to
Okay,
say
I
about
don't want
that.
to make the show focus about you, so it's not my intention to put you on the spot here. Obviously, you just joined and you mentioned you were a Christian, so and maybe there's a future show. So if you come on again, and you want to have those conversations, we can do that. I mean, primarily we deal with Islam, which is but if you're on and you want to talk about that, we can. But I don't want to make the show a focus of, looking at Christianity at this moment in time. If you just come on, because obviously you just, but really it was
Also,
more.
we're talking about Islam. Sorry.
Yeah, no, but that's fine. Obviously, that's how you started. That's how we came on, because obviously we're talking about, is slavery condoned in Islam? Is it encouraged? And obviously we have a Muslim, at least one Muslim viewer who seems to suggest that Islam, if I don't want to misquote him here, let me just see what he actually said here rather than what I remember him saying. He did say in the chat here, where is it? It does not encourage slavery. By it, I'm assuming he means Islam. I don't think he could mean anything else here. So The definition of slavery is problematic, Rob. Well, Sharif, as a Muslim, my definition of slavery is the owning of one human being by another. Is that acceptable to you? If it's not, what is your definition? You're more than welcome to type that in and we'll read it back.
Oh man, no, don't go there. We don't want to have definition.
No, well, I'm just interested in
Debate
what he means. I mean, would you agree, Abu? And I can see Ravens there. Ravens, oh, you can't. We can't hear
You
you.
have to.
Yeah, I can see,
don't know
buddy.
why.
Oh no, there you go.
No,
I can hear you.
he works.
Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Yes.
there you go.
Am I audible?
Yes, it's just a bit of a delay. So when you're speaking or when we're speaking, just give it a moment because I think you're on a little bit of a delay there.
Yeah.
Just say something again for us. Yep, there you go. There you go. Jonathan Brown, Islam and the problem with slavery. Yes, we can go read that, Sharif. What I really asked for was, what's your definition of slavery? What do you understand by slavery? To me, it's the owning of one human being by another, which I think is a fairly simple and easy to understand definition, or my understanding. It doesn't have to be a definition. Raven, what's your thoughts? You've been on and off. You've probably listened a little bit here.
Yeah, ended up restarting. No, I mean, basically, ever since the birth of agriculture, slavery has been the most profitable thing for any society. I mean, America, you're talking about the Atlantic slave trade. America was built on the back of slavery. It would never, ever, ever be the superpower it was without slaves. As for your actual definition of slavery, yeah, I mean, I suppose like an alternate definition, which is basically the same thing, would be a job that you can't quit.
Yes, yeah. Well, not even that, but the job where the boss tells you what to do from the moment you wake up until the moment you fall asleep, and even when you fall asleep, you're probably told where you can and can't sleep.
Yeah, I mean, I remember you said, yeah. I know you were mentioning, like, is there anywhere in the Bible which says not to own slaves? As far as the Old Testament goes, the only verse I'm aware of that even comes close to that is that an Israeli is not allowed to enslave an Israeli.
Yes, I mean, it's a bit more specific than that, I think, which again, Hilarious can bring up at some point. But there's very clearly verses in Deuteronomy and I can't think of the other book that do talk about that. But I think his point was, Jesus came along and basically, without saying it specifically, said, treat love one another, love your neighbors, I love you type of thing. And I think some Christians will suggest that overrides the original Old Testament slavery. But I don't want to focus too much on that.
Well, Jesus also said that he hasn't come to bring peace but the sword, to turn household against household, husband against son, son against father, things like that. I have not come to bring peace but the sword. Any man who doesn't own a weapon, let him sell a cloak, and buy a sword.
Yeah, I've obviously heard that as well. No doubt Christians will have a response to that. I think, as far as I'm aware, and again, people who have read the Bible more than me can bring their comments. I'm not aware of actually I am. Isn't there something with Jesus talking about where you've got to you've got to be with your masters and obey them? So there's something about that. I'm sure there's something about
about Caesar. Are you on about Caesar? Rend unto Caesar.
No. Basically, something about Jesus specifically talking about, if you are a slave unto your master, be loyal to your master, treat him well. He needs to treat you well, that sort of thing. So basically, saying
servant.
Yeah, servant. Okay. So
slave and servant is a different thing. Don't say that Jesus said slaves. He said servants. He must be like servants to others.
So what's the servant?
I think one of the very interesting things about Jesus, especially when it comes to the Old Testament, Jesus said flat out, "I have not come to abolish the law, but to fulfill it." And he was very clear. Still applies. Where he was clever is saying, can really fulfill it. It was sort of a circular reasoning. Is not saying I abolish the law, but sin cast the first stone.
A bit. I agree. I understand what you're saying, but he did kind of not change it, but he kind of, when he fulfilled it, some of those ordinances don't apply anymore, like the festivals.
Sorry, what do you mean fulfilled it? Fulfilled what?
Ordinances like the temples, going in, cutting, sacrificing animals.
Well,
all those
I mean, well, Jesus never actually fulfilled the old prophecy. I mean, if he did, there'd be no more Jews. They would have all converted. I mean, some of the signs of the Messiah is to gather all the Jews back to the house.
But the Jews
of Israel.
rejected him.
Never
That's the whole point of the story.
Build the temple. It will be an era of world peace. I mean, I think the Bible says, nation shall not lift sword against nation, something, 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 nor shall man know war anymore. And that obviously didn't happen. I mean, Jesus never fulfilled the Old Testament prophecy.
You're mistaken. You don't understand what he was trying to fulfill.
Okay, hang on a moment, Hilarious. I don't want us to get sidetracked on Jesus at this stage.
Sorry.
No, that's fine. But you guys are both having that conversation. We can, and we can do it in the next show. I just don't want to overlap the shows too much, and then it becomes a Christian for the rest of us. But if you're willing to come on and you want to defend your views, tell us why you think you're right, what we are missing as non-believers, I'm very happy for you to do that. And then we can set up a whole show where you do that.
Yeah, can you add me on G+? Sorry.
Yeah, I'm sure I can. You subscribe to the Gin&Tonic show, aren't you?
I can do that now, sorry.
Yeah, just do that because that'll come up there as well. Sharif, I want us to stick to, as far as possible, to slavery and particularly you're here. So we've heard a lot of, some interesting jurisprudence from Abu, who's read quite a bit there. And it seems to me, as somebody who's not an expert on the texts, or I don't know anything about Arabic, and whenever I hear it, most Muslims accept that Islam condones slavery. Even today, they somewhat accept that. It's very hard to get away from it, because here's the thing, whenever I speak to Muslims, and one of their comebacks, which I think is disingenuous, but that's a side issue about this, bring a verse like it. If you think the Quran is not as wonderful as we think it is, or that it's been done by Allah, then bring a verse like it. And a simple one-sentence statement could do that, and we would not be talking about slavery. If the Quran said...
Well, I mean, just to jump in there, where the Quran actually talks about the freeing of the slaves, it actually says the process by which a slave can earn his freedom. And it's exactly the same as Roman law, which predates the Quran by centuries. So, boom, right there.
If you can grab us, that would be useful for me, Raven. If you've got a link to anything that talks about that, that'll be very, very useful for me, because sometimes that comes up in Speaker's Corner.
Yeah, I'll just see if I can look up the verse.
Yeah, please, that'll be great.
But it's exactly the same as Roman law. And, obviously keeping in mind, the whole point of the Quran is the Quran is needed because humans could never come up with this by themselves, hence the verse. If this is from any other than Allah, then show something like it. So the fact that you have Roman law predating the Quran, which has the exact same law, it actually shows that we don't need the Quran because we can do it ourselves. But let me see if I can find that verse.
So I think, if there was a single verse in the Quran that said no human being shall own another human being at any stage ever for the history of the world, we would never be talking about slavery. It clearly doesn't, and at least Sharif is honest and says there is slavery in Islam, and I think Abu has been very good and very thorough with his jurisprudence to show that not only is there slavery in there, it's very clear from experts in jurisprudence, experts that understand Arabic, and in the books themselves. Even for me that's not an expert, I can read the verses and they're very clear. So I don't think Muslims can get away in any stage with saying that A, it's not condoned, and B, that it's been abrogated or it's been abolished. So they can't get away from that. What I notice they do is say, oh, well, it happens in Christianity, it happens in the West, or there's some other reasons, or, as I've said, they'll say, well, on what basis do you say it's wrong? And so instead of dealing with it and accepting it, And that would be no problem in the Middle East, by the way. I don't think anywhere in the Middle East, if I went to the Middle East, and I haven't, but I can ask people that have, it would seem, or I'll ask the question, is it the case that if you go and ask people in the Middle East that are not in a Western country, is slavery condoned, is it accepted, what would be their response? Abu, you've traveled a lot, I'm guessing?
Excuse me, I'm trying to... Is stop spamming here?
Not that I can see.
Okay. Anyway, what was the question?
The question was, if one went to the Middle East, not in a Western country, and you asked Muslims there, would they say that slavery is not only condoned, but it's part of Islam under certain circumstances? So if you went there, they wouldn't say, hey, we don't encourage slavery. They would say under certain circumstances, or would they not?
I mean, it depends on whom you ask. I mean, if you ask a random dude on the street, he probably doesn't know much. But, I mean, it's very hard to deny. I mean, it's mentioned so many times in the Qur'an, so it's very hard to deny.
Right, so this isn't actually the verse I'm looking for, but you might find it useful. This is Surah 90, and I'm beginning at verse 13. So it's going to be verse 13 to 20.
Surah 90?
And this talks about the how it's a righteous act to free a slave. So Quran chapter 90, verse 13 to 20. The slave, a day of severe hunger, an orphan of near relationship, or a needy person in misery, and those who believed and advised one another to patience and advised one another to compassion, those are the companions of the right. But those who disbelieved in our signs, those are the companions of the left. Over them will be fire closed in. And so again, like the very first verse is the one I read is, in the freeing, these are the companions of the right. But it's not the verse I was looking for, but I thought you might like it. So again, that is Quran chapter 90, verses 13 to 20.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I see that. I'm seeing in the chat there, Fee basically saying, Rob, I don't think Islam promotes slavery. I don't think you were here in the beginning, Fee, and obviously Abu has read quite a bit here. It seems...
What? Not promote slavery? Yes, it does. I mean, didn't you listen to my when I read? I mean, isn't this promotion? Wait. For the first, like, Allah promotes jihad. That's quite obvious. And in jihad, you either kill them or you take them as slaves. There is like two options. So. Well, but this one I read, what I mean, from Surah Nisa, and if you fear that you will not deal justly with the orphan's girl, then marry those that please you of other women, 2 or 3 or 4. But if you fear that you will not be just, then marry only one, or those your right hand possesses. So what your right hand possesses is...
Sorry, that right there seems to me to be a clear example of the Quran having something missing, and if you fear for the orphans, marry the women. It's like, what? It's like it's just jumped from a different...
No, it's because if you take care of an orphan girl and you fear that you can't control yourself, then you should be married so you can discharge your urges on the one you're married to. 2 or 3 or 4, but if you can't treat those 4 women justly, then you should just have one wife, and you can also have a lot of female slaves that you can.
Rob, do you want another quote on freeing slaves?
Is this in the Quran, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead. What one is that?
I still haven't found the one I'm looking for, but this is chapter 4. Chapter 4, verse 92.
Yeah.
And never is it for a believer to kill a believer except by mistake. And whoever kills a believer by mistake, then the freeing of a believing slave and a compensation payment presented to the deceased family is required, unless they give up their right as charity.
Okay, I see what it's saying.
But if the deceased was from a people at war with you and he was a believer, then only the freeing of a believing slave, people with whom you have a treaty, then a compensation payment presented to his family of a believing slave. And whosoever does not find one or cannot afford to buy one, then instead a fast for 2 months consecutively, some repentance from Allah. And Allah is ever knowing and wise.
Yeah, I don't think there's any dispute that Islam allows slaves to be freed. I think our main concern is that it condones it and in fact encourages it in certain circumstances. I'm not claiming that, and I don't think Abu is, and it's not clear that you just go and you pick up every single woman you want and enslave them. But there seems to be very clear guidelines as to when that can happen, and it's encouraged and condoned.
Yeah.
And there's nowhere that says no slavery at all, right? Stop slavery now completely in any sense. So yes, you can.
Well, what was quite interesting
Can
to
I-
me is
can I-
often when I talk to Muslims, they actually tell me that if someone converts to Islam, then they should immediately be freed. And yet that verse I just quoted talks about a believing slave. So obviously, what's going on there?
Yeah, that's bullshit. I mean, there is fiqh books about slavery that goes into very detailed things, exactly how you treat them, exactly how you distribute them in jihad and so on. They're very detailed fiqh books. Can I say, reply to Sharif al-Hadi said, but slavery is outlawed now with the acceptance of the fiqh people. No. If I quote Albani once again, Sheikh Albani said, would that the verdict/rulings of the slavery comes back to the dwelling places of Islam. He wished that they come back. In that case, we would not find in them anything baffling. Many of the people today claims that there is no slavery in Islam, and this is from the aberration that has inflicted some Islamic authors. Slavery in Islam is not anathematized/abandoned. No, but it's not allowed to anathematize it because the infidel councils and those who are associated with them, blah, 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 blah. Good slavery in Islam is something from the Sharia that has not been abrogated, and it will not become abrogated, especially not if the abrogator is associated with the infidel council. It can never be abrogated. And to abrogate slavery would be to commit kufr, because Allah says, وَمَنْ لَمْ يَحْكُمْ بِمَا أَنزَلَ اللَّهُ فَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْكَافِرُونَ. And the one who doesn't rule with what Allah has sent down, so they are the infidels. So if you rule with something other than Allah's Sharia, and you think that you should rule with another law than Allah's Sharia, then you have committed kufr al-akbar. You are a kafir.
Albani is dead. I don't think that's an argument against what Abu is saying, though, Sharif. He could well be dead, but from what I understand, he was a well-respected.
Fawzan is not dead. Sheikh Abdul Muhsin al-Abbad is not dead. There are a lot of scholars today that say this.
Yeah, but it doesn't matter whether somebody's alive or dead. We look at what they've said, and have they got good reasons for saying that or not? Ask the current ones. A ruler can regulate laws according to certain circumstances.
Yeah, but it's Al-Uthaymeen says that in another it's how. But then we go deep into the fiqh thing. But like, how should the slaves be distributed and so on? And the ruler of the land have a role to play there. Yes. But
okay, I guess let me play devil's advocate here for you, Abu. So let's assume that Sharif is kind of saying, but hey, a ruler can actually overrule that, and he can say there will never be slavery under Islam in my country. Can that be done?
I have to check it up.
Okay.
I'm not 100% sure that he can say that.
Okay.
But it's not that you're not forced to have slavery, but one thing that is forced is jihad. You have to make jihad. It's fard kifaya. So that is something that is fard or obligatory.
I think, again, you tell me, because you obviously have quite a bit of knowledge on this. One of the things that is it a requirement or a recommendation? You choose the word. That Muslims follow the example of Muhammad in the way he lived his life, the acts that he performed, the things that he did, etc. Is that something that Muslims should follow, or are they required to, or should they step away from that?
لقد كان لكم في رسول الله أسوة حسنة لمن كان يرجو الله واليوم الآخر. That was from the Quran. Truly, it is in the Prophet Muhammad an excellent example for those who fear God and that last day.
Very dramatic, but okay, I get it. So they should.
But in more in detail, certain things you have to follow, like you have to pray 5 times a day. That's some ulama even think that if you don't pray 5 times a day, you are a kafir. But that's like school of Hanbali thinks that, although Shafi'i think that it's possible to be a Muslim if you not pray, but you're going to spend a lot of time in hellfire. Probably. But and then there are other things that are sunnah, but still far like
Shafi'i think that it's.
I think that's fee. Fee, just put the headphones on.
Headphones.
We can hear you playing back there. Welcome.
Like, for example, certain things in there are certain things that are mentioned in the sunnah that is faral, that is you have to do it, but you don't become a kafir if you don't do it, and things like that. And then there are certain things in the sunnah, like, for example, having a beard. Sharif al-Hadi thought that I verbally abused him when I accused him of not having a beard, or I said, "You don't even have a beard." That was a joke, but yeah. Anyway, I personally don't want to force anyone to have a beard, but having a beard is clearly wajib. You have to. That's a command from the Prophet.
Okay, is there anything, just on that point, is there anything
But you don't become a kafir if you don't let your beard grow.
Okay, because there's 1 or 2 Muslims in Speaker's Corner. Paul is one of them that doesn't have a beard. And actually, I think he's
a sinner.
And I think he's obviously tried to, portray that you, like you said, you don't have to have that. You won't be, no. It's not a sin not to have it, but it's recommended. Is that what you're kind of saying?
No. It is a sin. It is. It's a sin, but you don't become a kafir. It's not a kufr.
So if somebody didn't want to have a beard, could they not have a beard?
Not prescribed.
Sorry, Raven. There's a delay there. So just hang on 1 sec, because you come in, but then we can't hear you because there's like a delay on the line. Carry on now. What did you want to say?
Okay, there are certain things that are kufr. Like if you pray to another god, or you pray to a grave, and you know that is shirk, then you become a kafir. You're no longer a Muslim. There are certain things that are sins, like if you commit zina or you steal, that is stealing. Abu Mulhid, do you have a beard? What does it matter? In fact, I happen to have a beard, but not for that reason.
Sharif, just so you know, Abu is obviously not a Muslim, so I don't think that would apply to him.
Laysa ba'da al-kufri dam. There's nothing. There's no sin after kufr. So,
okay, I'm with you. Now, what I wanted to ask you, and then I'll let Raven hop in here. What I wanted to ask you is, if somebody didn't have a beard and you suggested it was a sin, they could choose not to have the beard and just ask for forgiveness each day and say, "Hey, do you know what? Forgive me. I just don't want to have a beard," and that would be okay.
I just want to reply. Say, you're a pious atheist. No, I'm a pious Stoic. The Stoics also had beards. So. So
you're suggesting that not having a beard is a sin. I'm asking you, is that okay that they just ask for forgiveness each day if they didn't want to have a beard, for example?
Just before you reply, Abu, just want to check. You said, is it coming from Sunnah or is it from Quran that not having beard is a sin? Because I don't.
No,
Yeah.
it's Sunnah. I haven't memorized the Nas, but it's like let your beards grow out.
Yeah. Sunnah has got all sorts of crap stuff coming from Hadith. But yeah, I don't think it's in Quran though. So
No, it's in, but it is Sunnah. But unless if you don't accept the Sunnah, you're gonna have a lot of problem. How are you gonna pray? How are you gonna fast? How are you gonna do Hajj? I mean, if you don't accept the Sunnah, it's problematic. Then
yeah, but a lot of people do. And sorry, I'm maybe taking the conversation on a tangent, but a lot of people are Quran-only Muslims, and they do say, just because you have invented the kind of prayer Muslims do and whatnot, it doesn't necessarily comes from the Quran. So you can be a Muslim and just follow the Quran and the teachings and just pray according to it.
The last Quranist I spoke to told me that he finds in the Quran commandments to pray 3 times a day.
Well, it kind of implies that Quran clearly says 3 times a day, but it gives some sort of space to interpreting some of the verse that you need to pray 5 times. But yes, Quran clearly says that it's 3 times, but not 5 times.
Mention it's 3 times.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
So sorry, I just joined in, Abu, just to ask, sorry, I missed the initial 10-15 minutes of your talk. But my point was, I don't personally see Quran sort of promotes slavery. If I look at the wars sort of in modern day as well, you've got prisoners of war. From the comment you made, are you talking about the prisoners of war and sort of in Islamic times, those were called slaves, or is it differentiation between them?
No, you take slaves in jihad. That's how the people become slaves. So you have say that you have country X invades country X is Muslim and they invades country Y.
Yeah.
And then they defeat and country Y is are infidels. So the Muslims defeat the infidels and either they kill them, but they can't kill the women. But either they kill the dudes that are older than have reached puberty, or they take them as slaves. And it's
doesn't it also say not to kill old men and priests?
Yeah. There's certain rules. Like you can't. There are many things, and then when you read it, you see that the rules of this is very adapted to those times. Like it was another time back then.
Yeah.
People thought differently.
I agree. So how is that different to the current version of we don't invade countries, some mostly, but say in 1400, 1500.
We don't invade countries. Speak for yourself.
Sure, I agree.
Soon.
So I'm asking, how's that different than taking prisoners of war and then putting them in a jail? I know it's not slavery in that sense, but the conditions are kind of.
Okay, well, I think it's
but look, huge difference between there's a huge difference between a criminal who has been tried in court and put into prison and actual prisoners of war. I don't know if you're actually familiar with international human rights laws or the Geneva Convention, but you should look it up. I mean, as far as Islam and slavery goes, I mean, just to give an example, if me and you went to war, let's assume that you've got a wife, that you've got sisters, daughters. If you and I went to war, if I followed Sharia, I would actually check to see if your son had like a single pube. If you did, I'd kill him. your female relatives, your wife, sister, daughters. I could actually slaves and pretty much legally, Islamically, rape them while your blood is still on me. I mean, I actually spoken to a Muslim once, and we were talking about the Sharia, and I just said to him, like, if me and you went to war, sort of the example I just gave to you, I says to him, which law would you rather I follow, Sharia law or the Geneva Convention? And he squirmed like a fish on a hook. And after a couple of seconds of silence, he said, but eventually you have to set them free, which is not true. But like, that's the best he could come up with.
But back to your question, Fia, like,
I agree with what you're sorry, Abu. I agree with what you're saying. The Geneva Conventions are sort of in the current modern age. But I'm talking about, say, 1400, 1500. There was, I don't think there were any other laws while you are actually invading another country. You can rape and pillage the whole place as you liked.
There was a shitload of laws. It purely depended upon the society at large. I mean, all over the world, from Europe to Africa to Middle East to everywhere, every single society had certain laws regarding slavery. Now, one of the things to keep in mind is one of the things that was different with particularly the American Atlantic slave trade is a lot of slaves, a lot of them pretty much became like family. You know, they were people who raised your children, who you sort of had worked with side by side. So most societies, in fact, I cannot think of a single society that did not give certain rights to slaves. I genuinely can't think of a certain.
What's your point though with that?
I don't have a point. I'm just replying to Fee saying that rights for slaves never existed. I can't think of a single culture which didn't have some laws on the books for slaves.
I think, Fee, maybe part of the thrust of your question is you're asking about what happened in, let's say, Western civilization or Christianity in the 1500s. And it could well be, I mean, none of us are historians, but it could well be that they were treated the same, better, whatever the case may be. I think the main point, though, is to say that nobody in the Western world now has or condones slavery. Now, obviously, we've got Hilarious on here who would defend his point. He's a Christian. He would defend that Christianity doesn't say that, or it didn't when Jesus came along, and we could debate that. The fact of the matter seems to be that there's no slavery on the books or allowed or condoned in the Western world today. And that doesn't seem to be the case for Islam. Or if it is, they're very choosy about it. So that's the big difference. And the question to ask is, do Muslims today condone slavery as the definition of owning one human being by another at any stage, including war? Because nowhere in war, like you quite rightly said, do we take slaves. We take prisoners, and that's very different. We're not owning those people. They're being kept, they're being tried, or they're being freed, whatever the case is. But there's a big distinction between a prisoner of war and a slave. And so the question to ask a Muslim is, do you condone or do you condemn slavery today, the owning of one human being by another under any circumstances? That's the question to ask.
Well, just to jump in, you said that no one in the West condones slavery. If you actually go by the laws of the lands, then it's actually kind of a funny area. I mean, if you consider, for example, America. Now, you've got like people in the service industry, particularly like waiters, waitresses, and people of that sort, who rely on tips, paid enough by their employer to live independently. Like, if they don't get good tips, they don't eat, they don't pay rent. This is perfectly fine and acceptable in the US, yet under European law, that is legally classed as slavery. It does not give you a wage you can live on. You're a slave. Americans today, under European law.
Can you find that? Because if that is the case, Raven, then I'd say European law is either has been misread, or they clearly have got a completely different definition of slavery to any other Western country on the planet. So I'd love if you've got some kind of citation for that you can show me.
But European law is misread by saying the employer has to give you a living wage.
No, European law has been misread somewhere, either by yourself or somewhere. I'm not saying that is the case, to say that that's slavery or a form of slavery.
No. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is, under European law, if your employer does not give you a livable wage, it's legally classed as slavery. Yet in the States, that's perfectly fine, and it's not classed as slavery. Even though your employer does not give you enough to live on, you have to live on tips. Under American law, that's fine. Under European law, if you don't have a livable wage by your employer, it's classed as slavery. This is why you get cases where why you get cases in the UK and Europe that actually have certain people who run sweatshops. They're still paying them enough to live on, and this is why you get in front of a judge. It's classed as slave labor.
Can you provide any citation for that? Anything that we can look at on that? Because it seems like the definition of slavery has changed completely then, because the definition of slavery, as I understand, the one I use, and you can tell me if you've got a different one, is the owning of one human being by another. So those people in the sweatshops, are they free to leave at any stage if they don't want to work there?
Well, what would you consider Gulf states like Saudi Arabia, Qatar? Would you consider the people who work there slaves?
I don't know. What are the conditions there? Are they owned by another human being? Are they allowed to leave?
No.
On that, I actually...
You can't actually, you can't, like in Saudi, for instance, you can't just leave. You actually have to get permission from your employer to exit the country. There's things like that. A lot of them, like one of the huge outrages when Qatar got the World Cup, people were outraged because they were going on about how, Qatar is building this stadium on the backs of slaves. It was in all the newspapers.
Well, then, yes.
Slavery.
Raven, can you please? When I was in Saudi, I actually met some guys that practically were slaves. They're not legally slaves, but in reality they are slaves. And they were all black, also all African.
When you say they were like slaves, what do you mean? Were they owned by somebody? Were they free to?
Yeah, they had their lord, and they followed around. They followed them around and was like their servants where they go, and they practically are like slaves. But like you can have this, like, what is wage slavery? Like you have certain factories in certain countries where people work themselves to death with very bad conditions, and also you can see all the Bengali people that are working in the two Haramain in the Great Mosque. They are almost as slaves, but they have a salary, but it's very, very low salary. So yes, that's a kind of wage slavery that is almost bordering on slavery.
I think there's a very important distinction to be made with all of those, and all of those are bad by the sounds of them as well. But the distinction to be made for slavery, as we understand it, unless you want to widely define way more things as slavery, is, are they free to leave? So yes, they're in bad conditions. Did they choose that? Well, if they didn't choose it, then yes, that's slavery. But if they did choose to go there and there was bad conditions and they went, you know what, I can't find anything else, I'm getting a pittance, but I'm going to stay and live under that, then that's not slavery, is it? As long as they've got a free choice to leave, even if they don't think they have, then it's not slavery.
Yeah, I know. It's that they're not owned in that way. Sharif Al-Hadi says, serfs in Russia and Scandinavia, people fixed the land and work for food. Like, I think actually the word slave, I think we have that. I'm not 100% sure, I'm not a historian, but I actually think that that word is there because of the Vikings. Because the real word in Nordic languages for slave is thrall. But since, like, the Slavic peoples in the eyes of the Scandinavians, they just went overseas and then they picked up some Slavic people and then they used them as slaves, or they used them as thrallar. I think that is how the word come from, but I'm not 100% sure.
I don't think it's important where the word came from.
No, but he's
asking,
talking
yes,
about that in the chat.
Yeah. We've got TJ and obviously Hilarious and Fee. I don't know if you guys have got any questions or any thoughts you have on this issue still.
Not really. I mean, I think it's pretty self-explanatory. There's no way that any believer can condemn slavery in any way, shape, or form. So I think the Quran is quite clear. Hadiths are quite clear. The Bible, the Prophet is quite clear. So I don't think there's much debate. We can talk about modernity all we want, but slavery is a part of Islam. I mean, just plain and simple. And I mean, there's a whole chapter called the spoils of war. So, and there's no way. I mean, in my view, I mean, you would have to do a lot of tap dancing, a lot of gymnastics to try to even make the argument for some sort of abolitionism present within Islam. So I think it's pretty futile.
Yeah, I'd agree. I don't think there's any disagreement, even with Muslims, that slavery happened. Up until when? I think the question is today, in 2017, would Muslims condemn slavery as defined as the owning of one human being by another today? And you probably will find a number, if not many, many Muslims who would, but they're probably people who aren't following the Quran closely, or the Hadith for that matter, I would assume.
And in order to abrogate slavery, you would have to abrogate the concept of jihad, so which is going to be impossible, because that's a central doctrine. So through jihad, that's how you get slaves. So,
but it's also when I read this Sheikh Albani, it's also that they see it as something good. It's good. If I read it again, like as well the it's good for the enslaved also. I repeat, it is good for the enslaved also, the infidels, and that is what the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam pointed to in the Sahih Hadith. He said, "Truly, your Lord is baffled by tribes that are dragged to the paradise in chains," meaning that because they are enslaved by the good Muslims, and they are driven to the Muslim land to work as their slaves, or in the female case to be mounted, then that is good for them, because yes, they will live as slaves in this life, but in the next life, if they because of that become Muslims, then they will go to paradise eventually. Can't you see how good Islam is? So they are actually thinking that they are doing something good when they're taking their slaves. And the opposite is that they be killed immediately, and then they're going to go to hellfire. So it's much better to take them as slaves.
Just on that point, Abu, and that's why maybe I just need some more clarification. I know you guys have said and I'm not definitely supporting that Quran, clearly condemns slavery. It doesn't, and but if you are actually invading another country and you're successful, what would you rather be, a slave or a prisoner of war? Because in my understanding, a prisoner of war probably is in a worse state than a slave. So
yeah, okay. Well, this can actually, because I'm from I'm from Scandinavia, and I have so some of my ancestors, we fought with the Russians and so for a long time. So one of my ancestors was actually captured in a battle in Ukraine. Actually, they went down there, and he was brought to Russia, and he lived as a prisoner of war there. But the thing is, he was, at least after a while, he could come back, and yes, he was kind of free. He could do many things when he was there. Yes, he had to work. I think it was in Siberia or something, but he wasn't really a slave in that sense. But the thing is, today we have like international laws about these things, as Raven mentioned. if you invade a country for some reason, like for example, when George Bush invaded, and Tony Blair as well, Iraq, yes, they put some dudes in prisons like Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, who later become Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, but they weren't really slaves in that ways. They didn't like take them home to America and then like, oh, you know, you're gonna work for me and we're never gonna pay you anything and we can whip you and things like that. And they didn't like go there and say, oh, you know what, we're gonna take your daughters and bring them back to America and then they have to serve us and we can hump them whenever we want and so on.
Yeah, but Abu, Fee's question was which is worse, being a slave or a prisoner of war? And I think we can all agree that well, maybe we can't. I don't know. Do we all agree that Guantanamo Bay, that what the Americans did there was against the Geneva Convention? So they captured prisoners of war, which is fine, but they then took them somewhere. There was no trial. There was no evidence. They kept them for years and eventually released them. So, and maybe somebody can justify that. To me, and I'm obviously a Westerner, I condemn that because it doesn't follow the Geneva Convention. But Fee's actual question was, you know, which one would be worse? Is it worse, or how would you compare being a prisoner of war versus being a slave? And I guess it depends on which country.
Some prisoners of wars are as slaves. I mean, slaves, like in Islam, you can it's almost the same thing. Like in the Soviet Union, like the Soviet Union was worse. The reason why my ancestor he was kind of free. He had to live there in Russia until the king died. But he was kind of free. He couldn't do a lot of things, walk around, and he was kind of free. But that was because he was an officer. So officers were better treated. But if you take, like, for example, like the Soviet Union, they invaded maybe Poland or something, and then they moved a lot of dudes that made resistance to the gulags, and there they essentially worked as slaves. I mean, I would say that the gulag was pretty bad.
Okay, so
yes, that's maybe worse than being a slave to.
Okay, Fee, maybe you can clarify your question. Are you asking today, or are you asking in some day in the past? In other words, are you saying, would it be better to be, you know, if you were given those two options today under the Geneva Convention, is it better to be a prisoner of war or a slave, or are you talking about some time in the past? And if you're talking about the past, which country or what are you talking about?
Yeah, I agree. I think my question was primarily of the time when the Quran was revealed. So slavery was in existence, you know, throughout the world, I take it. And during the time it was revealed, I think it was probably better to be a slave than a prisoner of war or be killed. So I'm just talking from maybe historical point of view, not from sort of modern. You know.
Yeah, from an historical point of view, you're right. I mean, it's not. I mean, this was practiced always. I mean, this was back then. Like, I think it's hard for people to understand how bad things were back then. I mean, people were really nasty and bad. Yes.
What?
You were going to say something, Raven?
Oh, I was, but there was a certain delay and I heard Abu was still talking, so I shut up.
All yours, go ahead.
Well, there was two things. There was something I wanted to just go over with Fee, but I did want to quickly ask something. You were talking about Guantanamo Bay. The reason that it's in Cuba and not America, is that because Cuba didn't sign up with, so they can actually legally have Guantanamo Bay in Cuba, whereas they couldn't in America?
I'm not sure about the law.
There's at least, I'm not too sure the international laws, but it's the same thing. They use various, I mean, I think they use Egypt, for example. Maybe Sharif can confirm that. Americans, and they also use Thailand, for example, if you remember that. So
also, so just my question for Fee. I mean, when you say that you'd rather be a slave than a prisoner of war, I mean, keep in mind that if you were a prisoner of war, the reason you were usually held as a prisoner is so you could be ransomed. This is very different to being a slave. And I'm wondering if you're at all familiar with Muhammad's Jewish wife. Her name was Sophia. Do you know the story?
Yeah, kind of. But yeah, if you want to mention, please.
Well,
Yeah.
I'll just for audience, I'll just tell the story, and I'd like to get your reaction on it. So,
Is this coming from
anyone
Hadith?
listening?
Sorry. Is it coming from Hadith?
And if there's anyone that's listening to anyone who is listening to this, please feel free to check Islamic sources. So, after years of virtual stalemate between himself and the Meccan army, Muhammad decided to plunder the Jewish village of Khaybar, which was to the north of Medina. Now, Khaybar was a fertile oasis filled with lush palm trees, flourishing vegetation, and furthermore, the Jewish inhabitants, many of whom were expelled from Medina by Muhammad just a few years earlier, were skilled craftsmen with stores of gold and valuable weaponry. Now, Muhammad gathered his troops on the outskirts of the town. Preparing his armies for a surprise raid at dawn, he shouted, "When we descend upon their precincts, today shall be the morning of those who have been warned." With that, Muhammad's men descended upon the sleeping town, wreaking havoc, cutting palm trees, killing men, and enslaving women. Now, one of the men that was captured was a man named Kinana. Now, Kinana was rumored to have knowledge of the location of a great treasure. Muhammad had his men torture Kinana to learn the treasure's location, threatening with death if he refused to disclose it. One of the tortures, I believe, is they actually stripped him bare and actually set fire to his chest. So it was a lot of really brutal shit. And after finding the treasure, Muhammad had Kinana killed. Now, as the village lay in defeat, the blooded and bruised bodies of the dead scattered about the road. Muhammad had his men tie up the women and force them into sexual slavery. Now, the women, who were bound by rope and completely distraught, were screaming and wailing and pulling at their own hair and rubbing their faces in dust. And walking by, Muhammad referred to them as she-devils. And he gave orders to his companions, whatever women they wanted, was 17-year-old Sophia bint Huyay. Now, Sophia was sort of like a minor princess. She was the daughter of the tribe's chief. She was also the wife of Kinana, whom Muhammad had tortured and killed earlier. And once Muhammad learned of her status and of her striking beauty, he ordered her to be reserved for himself. He threw his cloak over her to show that she was his property, and she was cleaned, beautified, pleasure of the 60-year-old self-proclaimed prophet, the same man who had ordered the raiding of her village, the enslavement of her friends, the murder of her father, and the torture and death of her husband. And I've got two hadiths in front of me I'd just like to read out. So Al-Bukhari narrates, Anas said, when Allah's apostle invaded Kaaba, he offered the Fajr prayer there early in the morning when it was still dark. The Prophet rode and Abu Tahala rode too, and I was riding behind Abu Tahala. This is Abu Azizi narrating. The Prophet passed through the lane of Kibara quickly, and my knee was touching the thigh of the Prophet. He uncovered his... I'll skip most of this. Diana came. We conquered Kibara, took the slaves, and the booty was collected. Dihaya came and said, "O Allah's Prophet, give me a slave girl from the captives." The Prophet said, "Go and take any slave." Look, Sophia bint Huyay, the Prophet, and said, "O Allah's Apostle, you gave blah, 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 blah." Basically, rested to marriage, good dates. This is the one I wanted. We know the story. So this is the night of Muhammad's... I'm trying to think how to put it politely. Consummation of the wedding, I suppose. We spent the night there. Abu Aya Ubu I'm just gonna copy and paste that because I've got no idea if I'm pronouncing it right. Keep in mind, this is the Prophet's own companion who was with him. This person guarded the tent of the Prophet the whole night. When in the early dawn, the Prophet saw him strolling up and down. He asked him what he meant by this. Replied, "I was afraid for you with this young lady. You had killed her father, her husband, and many of her relatives. Until recently, she was an unbeliever. I was afraid to you on her account." And then the Prophet prayed for him. After hearing that story, I mean, would you really, honestly, in your heart of hearts, really want to justify that? Like, would you really want to justify it?
Can I say something? Sorry.
Sure.
Just while hearing that story, it's not the first time I've heard these kind of stories, but like Muslims in this room, like, what do you think? Like, seeing a prophet that's supposed to be the best prophet, you know, very close with God, doing all these things, and you see him basically just having sexual addictions, just going around raping all sorts of people. You don't see these kind of things like going on with people in high positions that are supposed to be holy. You don't see these kind of things. Like, how can you justify that?
Yeah, it's kind of funny. It's if you count, like, I don't remember the exact numbers, but if you count the number of battles that the Prophet was engaged in, thank you, Riva, and like how often he got a new woman, either a new wife or a new or a new sabi, a new female slave. It's like he got a new woman about every half a year. New woman. So can you imagine, like, you take someone like I don't know what you take. Say that Tony Blair, but he's not the president anymore. But we take Theresa May. Think that Theresa May have a new man every half a year. Like, the Sun is announcing, like, Theresa May have a new man, and then half a year later, a new man, and then half a year later, a new man. That's not a good example.
Hilarious. I would just say on your point there, you need to ask Muslims and listen to what they say, because obviously from your point of view and ours, it'll seem, you know, barbaric, etc. But just listen so that you can hear what they say. How do they justify it? What is their reasons for saying this is okay? Because they can't say that it's not okay. The only thing they could do, as perhaps Sharif is saying there, is the story is not correct or whatever. So their response to you could be, you're not telling the story correctly, which that's one response. The other could be they will give you some other reason as to why it's justified. So from your point of view, just as you learn more, if this is of interest to you, just listen to what Muslims say. You can obviously disagree with it, but listen to the rationale that's given to you as to why they think that that's okay. And then obviously you can make your judgment, because you are looking at it from a Christian point of view, or we're looking at it from a non-believer's point of view, and we're going, you know, if this really was a prophet, he behaved in ways that we think are extremely poor. But we need to listen to them, just so that you understand their point of view, understand their mindset, and what are they thinking, how do they justify, if they do justify it. If they just say, hey, yes, he did that, you know, I haven't met a Muslim who says, yes, he did that and it was bad. They will say, yes, it happened, and they'll give some justification, or they may do what Sharif did there and go, no, that story is not correct. Let me give you my version of the story. And if you listen to their version, it's probably very different to, let's call it, the other version. And that happens a lot, where when I go down to Speaker's Corner in the UK and I speak to them, unless you've got the verses ready there, they will give their version that sounds eminently plausible. If you were listening, you go, you know, the one that Raven read, no, that can't be right, because this Muslim has read a version that sounds so much more gentle and less unpleasant. And so now you're left going, I don't know. And so it's just a case of listening to what they say to understand their mindset and what the responses will be.
Yeah, I mean,
with stories like the ones that I read, a lot of Muslims justify it one of two ways, or sometimes both these ways. Number one, they'll say it's a love story, and I'll say, how can that be? And we'll say, well, because she came to love him. Well, how do you know? Well, because she didn't leave him, because he gave her a choice between leaving and staying, and she stayed. Well, number one, Stockholm syndrome. Number two, and what I think is more likely, I mean, her entire people had been massacred. She had nowhere else to go. She would have wandered off into the desert to die. The fact that she wasn't suicidal doesn't mean that it was a love story. And I always point out, every time they say this, it's like, yeah, but they wouldn't have survived otherwise. And I'm just like, well, who put them in that position in the first place?
Yeah, I mean, that's an important point. Many of these stories, when there is these women that are weeping and things like that, because you have to remember, how would you feel if your parents just have been killed, and your brothers, and maybe all the maids in your, I mean, is the first thing that you want to think, oh, I really want to have sex right now. And like my father and brother, and they are just been killed, but
Exactly.
you know, this is the really handsome bearded man here. Like, I don't know, in his
And it's
50s
not
or
even that.
something.
It's like
I
it's like
really
all,
want to have sex with him right now. That's what
No,
I
it's-
feel for.
it's
I
not
don't
even
want
that, it's like-
more, nor no.
no, it's not even that. It's like all these stories you always hear him. It's always something to do with sex. Like, is he a sex addict or something? Like, why can't you just do his things for God? Like, why does it always have to be about that? Like, it doesn't make any sense. Every single thing you,
Well,
every time there's a
just
woman.
with what Abu was just saying about, you know, oh, who would want to do it right after that? I mean, it's in the, it's right there in the hadith. His own companion was guarding the tent because, you know, you've just killed her and
That-
enslaved her. I mean,
Can you-
I was worried that she'd do something. That's why I was guarding your tent or not.
Raven, can you find that hadith for me? I'm trying to find that. This guarding the tent hadith. Please, can anyone
good
find
link.
that hadith for me? Anyone guarding the
I
tent
think
hadith?
it's in I think it's actually in it was Klingshaw, but I think he said it's in some sort of lexicon.
Yeah, but can anyone find this guarding a tent hadith? I want to read that as the hadith of the day. There was one dude that denied that it existed.
You do see the
Yeah, and
link
while
there,
you-
Nikki, right?
Yeah, while he's finding that, I just want to ask you the question: why are women? I don't know if this is true, but why are women kind of like objectified in the Quran, like in these stories?
Why are
Throughout the
women
whole,
what?
objectified and just like treated like dirt, not respected.
Well, Muslims will say to you that's not the case. They will say to you that women are respected. I will give you. I've actually got it on here, and of course, this is the Muslim apologist here in the UK, they can differ everywhere where they are, but they will say no, they're respected. They're treated as equals. If I bring you the video, I happen to see it today. Again, it's one of the Muslim guys that apparently is quite knowledgeable in inverted commas, that comes down to Speaker's Corner, and his basic premise was no, women are more valuable in the home because they take care of the children. Therefore, they are, I don't know how and why he came by this, but he says no, they are 3 times more valuable. And if there was no sort of counterbalance that the man was sort of in charge, then the woman would sort of run the show. So in order for it to balance out, men then need to be in charge. And so this is the response, and they looked after and so forth. So your view, that they would immediately reject that and say, no, women are taken care of. Look at what you Christians did. They will say various things. So
No, but it's not even that. Sorry, it's not even that. Like, you hear stories of them saying that you're allowed to beat them and you're allowed to have 4 wives and you're allowed to do this. Like, they don't respect. They don't. It's like, I can't explain it. They can try and justify it and say no, we do. They're very precious to us, but what they're doing, it doesn't reflect on that.
Is that in Islam, women are in a state of eternal childhood. If you are a woman, you are basically a minor. And so you can be 100 years old, you're still basically a minor. And what your treatment is purely on the whim of your male guardians. I mean, just imagine you have a pet dog, right? Now, you got some owners that are very abusive to their dogs, and you got other owners that give the dog a fantastic life. It's basically the same with women in Islam. They're not actually independent. They can't be independent because of Islamic Sharia. Now, what the Sharia dictates about finance and all this and all that, it's purely based on whether or not a man gives his permission. So you are in this eternal state of childhood. You are a perpetual minor.
just to go on, because obviously the topic's about slavery, it kind of like shows a recurring like theme here that you're always being, this all these things that we fought for, women's rights and all these things. It's like this book supports, objectifying them and doing all these things to them. So as a modern day Muslim, like how would you even respond to these kind of things? Because obviously we've gone through all these things, and now that we know that these things are wrong, and how can you really support this from this book? That's my question.
Most modern day Muslims would argue that the point of Islam was to abolish slavery, to end it, which is clearly not the case, but they point to specific hadiths and specific Quranic verses which encourage freeing of slaves. And they use this to justify that, Islam came to end slavery. Whereas if you actually look at the real world, I mean, it was just like there was huge slavery in Islam all up until the 20th century. I mean, Saudi Arabia only officially outlawed slavery in the 1960s, and this was because of Western pressure. There was actually a famous case with Thomas Jefferson. There was Muslim pirates who kept on capturing Americans and enslaving them. And Jefferson actually went to an embassy in Paris, and he was basically like, well, doing this to us, we're a brand new country, we haven't done anything to you. It's like, no, this is our religion. Around the Mediterranean, even in the UK, around Cornwall and around the coast and in Ireland, cities that were entire towns that were emptied. They were ghost towns because Islamic raiders, particularly Ottomans, you can actually read accounts of Ottoman slave trades in the 19th century, where it talks about women being paraded about naked. Most of them were the most valuable when they were white. In fact, I think there's actually a hadith that had one of Muhammad's companions, Abu Bakr. And I can't quote it, I'm going off memory, but I think there's a hadith where there was a slave woman who was made to walk around topless. And she basically tried to cover her breasts. And Abu Bakr beat her for that. Like, you're a slave, how dare you try and cover your breasts? Everyone should be able to see them. It was actually one of the reasons that this idea of like veiling, the whole idea of covering up and covering your modesty, it made a clear distinction between free women and slave women.
I want to welcome Christian Anarchist, I think has joined the chat.
Yeah, I invited him, sorry. Yeah.
Okay, no, that's great. So hilarious. Again, what I would suggest is if you've got time, type into YouTube Speaker's Corner Islam or Speaker's Corner and whatever, slavery or women, equality with women or anything like that, those sort of keywords, and you'll get some responses, because obviously from your point of view, you see it as extremely barbaric, evil, etc., which is fine, and I think we'd agree with you to some degree, but listen to what they say, because otherwise the way you come and you say, oh, they objectify women. Now, if you came down to Speaker's Corner and you spoke to experienced Muslim debaters there, they will immediately attack you for that, and we could say they're wrong, etc. But what I would suggest is if you want to have conversation with Muslims, etc., then ask them and see what their response is. Then you can do it. Because if you walk up to a Muslim and you say to them, hey, your Quran just objectifies women, if they know what they're talking about, they could make you look a little bit foolish in the sense that they've got an answer for it that sounds eminently plausible. And so they will quote hadiths, they'll do X, Y, and Z to make it sound like, no, you're talking absolute nonsense. It's equality of women under Islam. We treat them the same. In fact, they're better than almost anywhere else. If I find you this video, I will now do it for you because I've promised to do it for you.
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying. Sorry to disturb you. I agree with what you're saying. But is there no Muslim in here that can actually defend this?
We haven't at the moment. Sharif is in the chat. So if you look at the live stream itself, not this page that you're on, but the other one, which is the link to the actual video, there's a gentleman there, Sharif El Hadi. I think he's in Egypt, he said. He's a Muslim. I have invited Muslims on my channel. I've got 1,000 subscribers. We don't have many, so I do actually appreciate Sharif coming on here into the lion's den, so to speak, and to share his views. And we can say he's wrong. I still want people to treat him with respect. We don't have to treat ideas with respect. We do treat people with respect. But ask him in the chat there. So type into the chat on the other page, and I'll ask him any questions there in chat form, because he hasn't joined us, so it's probably easier to do it in chat form. But I will find you this video.
Is Sharif saying that Islam doesn't objectify women?
I haven't seen him say that. I mean, ask him the question, and he can.
Well, I mean,
what you
Sharif,
mean by that.
I will just ask him now. Assuming you believe that not objectify women and that hijabs and veiling have nothing to do with objectification, I have a question for you. So, let's say a 5-year-old girl veiled, would that creep you out? It would me. If I saw like a little kid veiled, I'd be like, that is sick.
But that's our point of view, isn't it, Raven? I mean, if they're brought up that way, then that won't be a problem for somebody in that society. So you're asking somebody who may well, the children are veiled. Now, they aren't in the UK, but somebody who's from another country, he might go, that's absolutely fine.
I don't mean the full burqa, but the whole modest clothing and hijab. And I've actually asked some Muslims, and like they've actually agreed with me. They've said like, no, yeah, it is kind of creepy when you see it on a little girl. And but we still don't seem to make the connection about.
But that's a subjective thing, isn't it? Some Muslims will say it is. Some Muslims will say it's not. So you're just getting a subjective opinion from whichever Muslim you speak to. If you go back to the Quran in the Hadith, if there's something in there, then obviously you've got a basis for saying yes, it is. No need for a veil for a 5-year-old, as Sharif is saying there. So he's obviously in Egypt. That may be his belief. It may be Egyptian law. Who knows? I'm not clear on.
No, I didn't ask if there was any need. I was saying, sorry, Sharif. I wasn't asking if there was a need for it. I was asking, would you find it disturbing?
Can we give him time?
Veiled.
Give him time to respond there. I've put, by the way, the video that I said I would into the chat, into both chats. So if you look at that video, that's by a guy called Mohammed Hijab. He's one of the regulars down at Speaker's Corner. If you watch that video, you'll get some idea into the logic and the responses that you're likely to get from some Muslims who are regulars, let's call it that. So watch that video, hilarious, when you get a chance. You can see what that Muslim says there. And by the way, he's got some philosophical training. He's well versed in Arabic, so he'll always do what Abu does and say it in Arabic first, and then he'll do a translation. So in terms of what other people think of him, he's rated really reasonably high. He's not just somebody that wanders past. So he'll give you a flavor of what the Muslim perception is of women, etc.
Yeah, sorry about that. I'm not very, learned in the Quran and all that. I'm just really, know very, very few things about it. So
that's fine. No, but watch videos, listen to what Muslims say, because then you'll understand their responses. Now we can challenge those, but at least understand what they're saying. Yeah. Sorry, Christian.
I have a quick question, if that's all right.
Let's just bring in Christian. Hang on a sec. Hang on a sec there, Raven. I think Christian, the other gentleman there with a sort of little icon, wanted to say something. Did you want to join in there, Christian?
No, I was just agreeing with you.
Oh, okay, cool. Sorry, carry on, Raven.
I can't remember if it was Fee or what was it? Is that hilarious? But I remember, I think both Christians, right? I can't remember if it was feel hilarious, but I remember when earlier in the chat, one of you was saying when the Quran was revealed, and I'm just wondering why you use the terminology revealed if you don't believe it's from God, which I'm assuming you don't. What would be in Christians and not Muslims?
Yeah, it's just
a hypothetical term, I assume.
Pardon?
I'd say I assume it's referring to the hypothetical term that it supposedly was revealed.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I can't remember if it was Fee or Hilarious that was saying it. I was just wondering the terminology.
I don't remember me saying it, but if I did, it's probably just a bad use of the word, to be honest. Yeah.
Actually, listening to your voice, I think it was Hilarious who said it.
Right. Okay.
What was your point there, Raven? That somebody used that word incorrectly, or they?
No, it was just me noticing that when we're talking about when the Quran was revealed, I just found it interesting. The word revealed, because it kind of sort of just the word itself seems to give credence to the fact that it was divine.
Well, not necessarily. We're focusing on entertaining the idea that if it was revealed, then so on and so on. So I can do the same thing when I've done these types of issues discussing with certain Muslims. I entertain the idea, and then eventually show the inconsistencies later on. That if it is revealed, then you still have these problems to deal with.
Yeah, I would agree with you, Christian, as well. I think we, if we're going to be intellectually honest, need to represent their views as accurately. In other words, we need to replay their views as they say them and not straw man them or say something different. And I think maybe that's the point. So if he says it's revealed, he's just saying what Muslims believe, not what he believes. And I don't think he's giving it credence potentially. I mean, you could say that book that the guy dreamt up. But, if you're speaking to a Muslim, you're probably not going to get a particularly good response. If that's what you're looking for, if you want to rile somebody up, I suppose you could say that. For me, I want to understand what they believe and why. And so I'm not going there to have a confrontation. I mean, it's possible. And there was one time I kind of lost it. It's not actually a video I had. Not that I lost it, but I just got a bit frustrated with somebody. It was not something that I've got on my channel. But that's very rare for me. I'm listening to what they're saying, and I'm divorcing what the view as in like my judgment of in the sense of like it's wrong. I want to understand what they say, and then have they got a basis for what they're saying? So I'd agree with Christian. I would use the word revealed because that's what they believe, because they are very good, and I don't say all of them, so I'm not going to generalize, but there's some Muslims who will strawman our arguments extremely badly. They'll say, all you atheists, you just believe the universe came from nothing. Or all you atheists, you haven't got objective morality. And I'm very quick to say, hang on a moment. Don't lump me in with everybody else. I can put forward an argument for an objective morality as a non-believer. Maybe some of my other atheists, have got moral relativism. That's not me. So I think the same for us is represent what they say as accurately. Then we can investigate it, examine it, take it apart, whatever the case is.
Well, usually people who say that are the kind of people that clutch at straws to make anything mean anything. I mean, like they're the exact type of people that would see some sort of magical link to the fact that on the time of the Jinn&Tonic show, we've got some guests who are Christian. I'm wearing a T-shirt that says Christian Death. It's not nothing to do with Christianity, by the way. It's a metal band. But like the exact type of people. It's like there's Christians on the chat, and by amazing coincidence, Raven is wearing a T-shirt that says Christian Death, and then to make some huge thing about that.
Yeah, I mean, there's different. If you look at the videos, I've met a lot of guys. I've been going there a year now, a bit over a year, and everybody's got their own way. And I notice a number of Muslims, and I'm not going to, again, lump them all in, but a number of Muslims go down there. It's a win-lose thing. It's like a school ground mentality. You've got to win or lose. And some of them will use words like, oh, I eat atheist for breakfast, or you got rinsed, or you got schooled. And for me, that's like, now I'm listening to somebody that's got a little child mentality. They want to have a fight in the schoolyard, and that's them. But for me, that's just intellectually a very low standard that, it's not who I really want to deal with. And so if I hear that, and I have actually debated some of those guys, and I'll just stick to the points. And if they bring that up, I'm like, that's a low level of intellectual, engagement. And, if you want to carry on at that level, that's fine, but I'll find somebody else then. So, but that's the mentality that I see a lot of there, going on down there. By the way, just to answer your question, Raven, hang on a sec. To answer your question, because you did ask Sharif about the veil, and he said most people find it rather cute, subjectively, cute little girl. So as I suspected, from a Muslim's point of view, if that's what they do in their society, they're going to find that fine.
Fair enough. But no, just on your point about like subjective morality. One of the things to point out is that Muslims do not believe in objective morality.
Sure, they do.
I found a single Muslim that believes in objective morality.
They all do. Every theist believes in objective morality. I'm surprised you would say that.
I've never met a single one.
Dude, Raven.
What do they say when,
Well,
when,
it's
when
true.
you ask them?
Most theists do not believe in objective reality. They
We've-
believe in absolute morality. Now, it's a very different thing. Absolute morality is the whole concept of theistic right and wrong. It's absolute morality. This is always right. This is always wrong. God said so. And and it's just say objective morality. It's using the definition wrong. They say objective morality when what they actually mean is absolute morality, or authoritarian morality. But like when it comes to objective morals, now you can prove quite easily atheists do believe in objective morality, because what is objective? It's like what the vast majority of people agree on. I mean, the Geneva Convention, that right there is objective morality. When it comes to subjective, yeah, there is subjective morality. But this is not the same as absolute morality, which theists believe in. It's not the same as objective morality, which people objectively decide what is moral and what is not. I mean, subjective morality is usually very little, very minute things. Like what is subjective morality?
Raven.
Right or wrong?
Raven, you're saying many things there. Some of what you said, I think, was actually kind of smart, but then you, yeah, but yeah. So you say it's not an objective morality, it's an absolute morality. Okay, I have some sympathy with that. You mean that it's not an objective morality that if you would remove all observers, any observer could look at it and would come to the same conclusion. Yes, it's more absolute in that sense that because Allah metaphysically created everything, so that doing this deed creates, I mean, is absolutely sinful just is sinful in some metaphysical sense. Well, yeah, that I can agree with. But when you say that objective morality, that is something where everybody agrees on, I wouldn't say that is objective morality, because it's...
I wouldn't say everybody. I would say that it's the majority consensus.
Again, making another example. Say that you take like something like, is it the sun that is going around the earth, or is the earth like rotating? Like there is an objective answer to that question. Most of the time in history, people thought that it was the sun that is going around the earth, like in Qur'an, in Surah Yasin, etc. But there is an objective answer to that, and it's the earth that is rotating, and it's also going around the sun in an ellipse.
Yeah,
so,
but we're at a stage in science right now where it's not just objective. The opinion of planetary rotation and orbit is absolute.
Yeah, but that is true either whether there is someone observing it or not. So it's objectively true, even if there is, what I'm saying. But so can you do the same thing with the morality? And that is what dudes like Sam Harris is trying to do. But just because someone just because all people can agree with something and all of them can be wrong, you see what I'm saying?
Well, surely you would agree with me that the three examples I gave are true. Absolute morality, objective morality, and subjective morality.
Well, you're bringing in a word absolute. I've not heard that one before, and I'm very careful with using the word absolute for anything, because if you look at it from an epistemological point of view, that's very hard to nail down if you really want to get accurate with it. So, and I've been having that conversation with a couple of people on my channel, because obviously there was a video that you guys might have seen, you might not have, where I had a conversation about knowledge and belief. You know, my view is that belief becomes before knowledge. We've had this conversation before, so I won't go into it again here now. But be careful of using the word absolute, because if you look into it, if you do a little bit of study into philosophy, there's not a lot of things that we can say absolutely. Now, there are some Christians, and I'm going
to my point is, though, this is the claim that theists make. You know, it's like when you say, well, whose authority are you to say that this is right or wrong? They have the best authority there is. They have divine authority. It's absolute. Allah says it.
Okay, so let me put this to you and see if you agree with this. I say, and I will slightly disagree with you, I say that they have got objective morality, and I have an objective morality that I can put forward. Now, you might say, well, no, theirs is absolute. But remember that we have presuppositions that we have to accept from a theist. So if a theist says, I have an objective or an absolute morality, there's a few things that we need to grant, that we need to accept in order to believe that they have got that, or for the conversation to move forward. We need to accept that there's a God, that this God is all-powerful, omniscient, omnibenevolent, and this God sent us a message, and also that there's some kind of consequence if we don't follow it. If we don't grant those suppositions, the presuppositions, we can't entertain them. And similarly, from my point of view, if you grant me 3 presuppositions, I can present an objective morality in the sense of a yardstick that is objective, that seems to stand up very well to scrutiny. So when you use the word absolute, it sounds like there's no presuppositions we need, it's just a fact. And from what I can see, that I wouldn't use that word to...
Usually claim.
Sorry, say again?
Which is the usual theistic claim.
I've never heard anybody say they've got absolute morality. They always say they have objective morality. I mean, Hilarious is on the committee. I can stand corrected. Hilarious?
Absolute.
What do you say, Hilarious?
Guys, before you go into much, like I understand that this is for guys like you that are into debating on Speaker's Corner, going into long debates about the difference between absolute and objective. I can understand that is useful, but
yeah, you're probably right. This isn't the time, and we're running late now anyway.
With I would, take it or leave it. Absolute is fixed, never changing. This is always right. This is always wrong. So that would be absolute morality. Objective morality is where we all come sort of come together. We sit, we debate, we use reason, and we decide. And then subjective is where consensus. It's just sort of more of an individual thing.
I think that definition, you started out well, but then when you started to say that it was objective morality has nothing to do with consensus. If there is an objective morality, there must be an
example. Consider the Geneva Convention to be an example of objective morality, where we objectively decide.
No. It might be objective. Might still be objectively true, but that it's not derived from an objective morality. It's derived from some kind of estimation, an estimation that I think is better than many other estimations. But to say that is an objective morality,
definition of objective.
Oh man, we're going to go into this.
Well, all right, we'll finish on this, Raven. I think the easiest way to check whether something's objective is to say, by what standard is the Geneva Convention right? And you can't just say the Geneva Convention's right because the Geneva Convention says so. So you need some underlying foundation in order to call it objective. So when you ask, is the Geneva Convention objective? My answer is no, it's not, unless you give me the criteria under which that can be measured. So if you just say it is, that's not the case. And just because it sounds like it to us and so forth, that's not good enough. So we need something to measure it, or a foundation against which to say it is right. Because if somebody like a Muslim comes to you and says, no, I think we should have slaves, and you say, no, I think the Geneva Convention, he's going to say to you, well, why do you think the Geneva Convention is right? And so you need an underpinning, a foundation for that. And so that's the question. Maybe it's for the next show, or at some point where you can come back and say, okay, I think the Geneva Convention is right because X, Y, and Z. Then we can discuss that.
You know what? Next Friday, I will be out traveling, so I can't be here. So next Friday, why don't you and Raven go loose, and you can spend the whole show defining words?
Well, hopefully we don't have to do the whole show.
I won't interrupt you. Okay.
Hopefully we won't be do it for the whole time. But that would be a way to think about it. So what makes the Geneva Convention objective? If you can give me that underlying foundation, then you've got a point. If you just say it's objective, no, then I would say it's not. It's subjective. People sat around and made a decision. Well, who says they're right? On what basis did they come to that conclusion?
Okay, but can you postpone that to next week?
Yeah, I think we're coming to the end. Have you got a hadith that you want to read?
Yes, I got an hadith that is kind of related to slavery. So I'm gonna end this on a kind of almost surrealistic. I don't know, surrealistic, but Anyway, from Sunan Abu Dawud, and Sheikh Albani says that this hadith is sahih. Narrated by whom? The tradition mentioned above has also been transmitted by Abdul Malik ibn Umar, though a different chain of narrators. This version was that in an Arabic.
Are you reading or what are you doing?
Wait, because they're not mentioning the name. حدثنا قال عبد المالك ابن عمر بهذا الحديث فقال. I don't know who is saying this hadith. Okay, but here's the hadith. Some dude is saying, they uncovered my private parts, and when they found that the hair had not begun to grow, they put me among the captives. So he become a slave. He didn't have to die because he hadn't reached puberty. So this is the great wisdom.
Cool. Good. So hopefully, Raven, you're around next Friday. If he's away, if Abu's away, Fee and Hilarious, thank you for joining us. You're more than welcome to come again. TJ, feel free to come in again. So perhaps we'll leave it as an open show for next week, where we can just discuss topics. We don't have to have something specifically up, and because Abu's not here, we can delve into some of the philosophical potentially points in more depth.
I have a quick question. Just because of the nature of the conversation of the show, some of the things we were talking about, I was wondering if I could just have a quick hadith of the day.
Yeah, sure.
If you want to.
Okay. So this is Bukhari, book 77, chapter 42. Kia divorced his wife, whereupon Abdul Rahman bin Azubaya al-Khrazi married her. Aisha said that the lady came wearing a green veil and complained to her, Aisha, of her husband and showed her a green spot on her skin. It was the habit of ladies to support each other, so when Allah's messenger came, Aisha said, I have not seen any woman suffering as much as this woman. Look, her skin is greener than her clothes. When Abdurrahman heard that his wife had gone to the Prophet, he came with his 2 sons from another wife. She said, by Allah, I have done no wrong to him, but he is impotent and is as useless to me as this, holding and showing the fringe of her garment. Abdurrahman said, by Allah, O Allah's messenger, she has told a lie. I am very strong and can satisfy her, but she is disobedient and wants to go back to Ritha. Allah's messenger said to her, if that is your intention, then know that it is unlawful for you to remarry Itha unless the wife beater, Abdurrahman, has had sexual intercourse with you. So you can't man you want to be with unless you spread your legs for the person that's beat you so bad you're green. Then the Prophet saw the 2 boys with Abdurrahman and asked him, are these your sons? On that, Abdurrahman said yes. The Prophet said, you claim that when you claim, i.e. that he is impotent, but by Allah, these boys resemble him as a crow resembles a crow.
Cool. Thank you very much. To everybody who joined us and to all our people in the chat, thank you again very much for coming on. Thank you to all my co-hosts and to all the others that are on here. We'll see you again next Friday, 8 p.m. UTC. We'll have an open show, so feel free to come on. Hilarious. You're welcome again, Fee and TJ and anybody else who wants to actually join the show. You're free.
One thing more, yes. I won't be in next Friday, but the Friday after that, I have a suggestion for a topic. That is to talk about the Muslim or the Muslim rule in Spain or Andalus. Someone is interested about that. Is that a good topic?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I've heard it being called the Andalusian paradise in inverted commas. Yeah.
Well, would it just be Spain? Because there's some very interesting topics to go into, particularly with Ottoman invasions into Eastern Europe.
We can do, I think, because that can be such a big topic.
We can do that topic too, but I have thought just because I have acquired a book about Andalus. So I thought maybe I can read it to not the next show, but the show in 2 weeks. When will that be? That will be
17th.
17th. So 17th we can talk about Andalus. Maybe other people can prepare about Andalus also and contribute with things.
Can you type that into the chat so I can see what it is?
No. The Muslim rule in Spain,
Oh, okay.
like that
Okay.
period when the Muslims.
You're not going to
ruled
read the
Spain.
whole book.
No,
So
no.
You'll do a summary of
What
that.
the name of that book? The name is wait a minute. It's called The Myth of the Andalusian Paradise.
That's the one. Yes, I've heard of that.
Yeah.
Oh, and just in case I forget, Rob, you wanted me to look up what I was on about slavery in European law. I got distracted, but I was reading some things from, it's actually in Article 4 of the Convention, the prohibition of slavery and forced labor.
Yeah. As far as I can see, those are two different things, but that's fine. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Good. Yeah, I've put that in the diary then, Abu, so we can do that for the show on the 17th. So if you get a chance to read that, then we can talk about that. And I'll see if I can find anything in the sense of like, what do Muslims say about that period? And then obviously you can bring the book and we'll see what happens. But for the next show, which is the 10th of March, we'll leave it as an open show. So again, please feel free to come along. We'll have an open show and we can just discuss whatever we come up with. Thank you again, guys. Thank you, everybody. And hopefully we will see you next Friday. Enjoy your time away, Abu, and we'll see you again on the 17th.
Salam.
Bye.
Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.